Excellent. All right. Well, hopefully everyone sees my screen already. I've got that shared and can see and hear me okay as
All
well.
good.
Perfect. All right. Thank you for joining me today. As Ron said, my name is Brian Judd. I'm Information Assurance Consultant and the Vice President of Information Assurance here at SynerComm. Company's based out of Brookfield, Wisconsin, which is real close to Miller Park or Milwaukee, if you're familiar with the area. I've been with the company now for over 18 years, actually going on about 18 and a half. The company is well over 30 years old now, so it's pretty unique being one of these companies that was selling information security and networking solutions both before, during, and after the dot-com bust. So we were certainly a player even before that time frame. I do have a Master of Science in Information Assurance, so I'm one of those education geeks. I definitely like to go after a lot of schooling and certifications and things like that. I've done a lot of work in my past, both with Juniper and Checkpoint technologies, not only engineering and designing networks and firewall solutions, but putting those in and even teaching technical training classes and stuff as well. I spent a lot of time as well in IP telephony, and then really just doing these security processes, IT audit, vulnerability assessments, and of course, penetration testing. And pen testing is where we're going to spend a lot of our time and discussion here today. So a quick agenda of what I'd like to review today is a good talk about penetration testing scope. I think it may be one of the more underlooked parts of the penetration testing process, but yet one of the most important. I want to spend a few minutes talking about passwords because they continue to be a problem for just about every organization, healthcare included, life sciences included. Talk about adversary simulations and continuous penetration testing, a couple things that you may not be as familiar with, like penetration testing. And then give some strategies for different sized organizations. You know, not every healthcare provider or organization is the same. Small companies are much different than large, and we'll talk about some of those differences. So, you know, why does healthcare care about penetration testing and security assessment? Probably for the most important reason is that you're required to. You know, there are laws and regulations that are telling you that you must undergo some forms of independent audit, assessment, and even penetration testing. The regulations and things have gotten well defined enough at this point where things like pen testing are actually called out formally by name and not just as some type of assessment or review or audit or something like that. The audit assessment type services where we're looking at best practices, comparing you against standards and benchmark type configurations. Those can certainly be performed by companies like SynerComm. Our team is a very technical audit team, if you will, but you'll commonly find those from accounting firms and other more general firms like that as well. But I do always like to say when it comes to penetration testing or ethical hacking, somebody trying to break into your systems, that comes with a lot of risk. It requires a really good, strong background and skill set, and you should really look at firms that specialize in penetration testing and not the more general firms out there. Always remember too, if there's patient data, healthcare information involved, that we always need to have business associate agreements and HIPAA pass-through agreements, things that make sure that your penetration testing company is covered under the same requirements that you are to protect that type of data. So definitely don't forget those agreements. I mentioned before, scope is probably the most critical part of the penetration test. You know, maybe not quite as much so as the testing, but in order to do good testing and make sure the right things get tested, scope is critical, and scope comes first. What we're looking at here is what absolutely must be tested. That should always include everything that you have externally that's out on the internet. That could be things that are in your own data center that are published or hosted externally, but it also includes all of the cloud services and things that people have moved to. So anything that you might be hosting now in Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, things like that, make sure those are part of your scope. If you're running private clouds as well, absolutely those should be part of your scope. Make sure that your pen testing firm is aware of those so that they're testing them. If they're not aware, they may not get tested. And depending on how it's set up, it might not even be visible or obvious that that private cloud exists. And then like the hybrid clouds, those are very, very common. I would say almost every organization that uses Microsoft 365 that hasn't gone to full Azure Active Directory is probably private or hybrid rather. You probably have some domain controllers on your premise as well as out in the cloud. So make sure that we're aware and testing both of those. Some things that don't always get remembered or noted for testing. Web applications, especially if your organization develops or does any custom coding of your own applications. Those are not getting scrutiny and testing, usually, at least from the developers. There's no third parties, because they're not off the shelf applications testing them. So make sure you're looking at your pen testing firm and your part of your annual assessment cycles to make sure that the web applications are being covered as well. APIs that support and run web applications and mobile applications are extremely important as well. And probably APIs and web services are often one of the most overlooked areas of security, and especially in application security. And then wireless networks. Just about every organization has wireless networks today. Healthcare, absolutely, we know all about that. So we want to make sure that the patient care and the doctor networks, the healthcare administrative networks, all of those things are well protected and well guarded. But still, obviously, providing that guest access and everything else that you're expecting for the public and visitors to the building. If you have third-party managed or hosted applications, again, we're talking about the cloud here, right? So things that maybe aren't in your data center, but still create a significant risk to your organization, make sure those are in our scoping conversations as well. And passwords. I always joke to our clients when we're talking about password security and doing password assessments that if you hire us to perform a penetration test, especially an internal penetration test, you will almost always get a free password assessment. In other words, we get to the point of privilege and access that we can dump all of your domain hashes or domain account passwords and attempt to crack those. That cracking process and that analysis of those hashes is very, very important. It should be done on a regular basis. Probably quarterly is a good period, but always remember passwords and definitely going to spend a couple minutes here just on passwords then as well. So it's kind of a sweet area for me. I really get into passwords and password cracking. Being in this field for so long, I realized that passwords have been around for almost generations at this point, certainly 30, 40 years. And the one thing that hasn't changed is that there's still a terrible means of authentication, meaning that just remembering some string of characters, numbers, whatever it is not a means of identifying who I am or authenticating that I am who I say I am. Weak passwords have been around since the very first password. I think almost everybody at some point in their history, unless you're very young, has probably actually used the password before. It's not common these days, but there are still very weak passwords that are common today. Just pulled this about 10 days ago before I did another presentation with Ron and a finance group just about a week ago. but we had in a pen test a password crack that was 14 characters long. Now, everybody would assume that a 14-character password is definitely long enough to never crack or be guessed, but it was our first guess, September 2022 and a pound sign. We use a capital S in September. That gives us uppercase. We have all the other lowercase letters. We have numbers and that special character. We have all 4 of the complexity requirements and 14 characters and still have a terribly weak password. So keep that in mind. Recommendation is always to use nice long passphrases. A sentence is way better than a password. Feel free to, capitalize the first letter in the sentence, use spaces and punctuation. You'll easily get 30, 40 character passphrases at that point, and they're much, much better than passwords. Put those, all of your other passwords in a safe then, let that safe automatically generate and create your passwords for everything else. And hopefully you'll only need to remember 1 or 2 good, strong passphrases, and you can go to your safe then for everything else. So again, passwords are very weak. SynerComm recommends performing password cracking activities on a quarterly basis. And we do offer a quarterly password cracking service as well. One thing I wanted to add to this presentation today, because these just came out a few weeks ago, is a little bit of an aside on using graphics processing units for password cracking. So if you're familiar with gaming computers or gaming PCs, the graphics card is often the most expensive component of the computer and the most important piece for playing these 3D, high-tech games and stuff like that. These cards get bought up extremely fast because they're also used for Bitcoin mining. So the miners out there try to gobble these up because they are the most efficient way to mine those coins and make them money. So the newest cards are always the best, and they want to get their hands on those as well. But we like to use them for hash cracking. Often we call it password cracking, but hashes are the mathematical equivalent or a calculated equivalent of your password. That's how we store them safely on servers so that we don't actually have to store the real password. So when we talk about password cracking, we're really talking about hash cracking. And the latest card that was just released on October 12th, which is the NVIDIA RTX 4090, got my hands on one of those just a few weeks ago. 280 billion password guesses per second. So in a single second, 280 billion guesses. Imagine how quickly we can crack and guess passwords. The reality is 8-character passwords crack almost instantly, 9-character passwords crack within a couple hours. And using those techniques like adding a year and a pound sign to the end of a password really allows us to guess very long passwords still in a short amount of time. So again, passwords are a huge, huge problem. Every industry, not just healthcare, not just life sciences, take this seriously. Password assessments are the best way to double check your password security. All right, back on track. So other things that you should be or could be doing on an annual basis to help support your independent assessment and penetration testing. One of those is what we call adversary simulations. Now, really in our industry, adversary simulations could probably mean about a half dozen different things, and you'll probably find just as many definitions if you start Googling for that. But what we're talking about here is a collaborative exercise where the penetration tester, where SynerComm's pen testers are working collaboratively with your team, your blue team, your defensive team. So we often call these a purple team exercise. That's because the pen testers are the red team, the defending teams are the blue team, and you mix red and blue together, you get purple. So this purple teaming is not only valuable for your defensive team to actually kind of see what the attacks look like as they're passing through your controls and hitting your networks, but you get a chance to validate controls. So, how effective is your firewall? How effective is your endpoint protection, or your logging, or your SIM solution, your notification rules? All of these different types of things can be validated in a controlled environment then with the penetration tester doing specific attacks to generate a certain log or a certain alert. So likewise, naturally, that becomes an ability to tune or improve your controls. If we generate an attack and you don't see anything in your controls, it doesn't get blocked, there's an opportunity now to figure out why. Maybe we can fix a control that wasn't enabled, or tune it so that it's more effective. And even more importantly, as we're getting into SIM solutions and basically aggregating your logs and notifying when security events are happening and things like that, these adversary simulations are really key. They're the only means of tuning and improving those types of environments. So the adversary simulations are something that have become very popular over the last few years. This might be a fairly new term to a lot of organizations, but definitely make sure that you're talking to your penetration tester about spending a little more time, not just delivering the pen test report, but also doing this one-on-one, this collaborative exercise after the fact. And then, as Ron mentioned in the introductions at the beginning, one of the things that SynerComm is best known for is our continuous penetration testing. So being in this field for so many years now, we've done pen testing for just about every size company, every industry out there. We have a lot of expertise in that. And if there's one thing that we saw starting to fall short, was the coverage in time from one pen test to another. Things are happening so quickly these days in the world of vulnerabilities, in the world of operating system, upgrades and patches and application updates and everything else. That rate of change is faster than what we're typically assessing or pen testing under. So one of the things that SynerComm has done is created a continuous external penetration testing solution. It is a service, a professional service that we still use our human pen testers to provide. But obviously we need to scale, and we need to be able to pay attention to millions of assets at the same time for all of our clients. So what we've also done is developed a continuous attack surface management platform. That term, continuous attack surface management, is a fairly new term, but SynerComm, being in this space for quite a while now, actually has a trademark on that acronym CHASM as our product solution for doing that attack surface management. So we've taken all of the tools that our pen testers have been using for years as both reconnaissance and pen testing tools and vulnerability assessment tools, and kind of wrap them into one product that we call CHASM. And that's a software as a service solution that some of our clients subscribe to. But it was built to support our continuous pen testing so that we can keep an eye on our clients' systems 24/7 year-round and alert our team when there's something interesting that's changed or something new that has appeared, so that we can get that human diligence back in there again. So definitely consider the concept of continuous penetration testing if you haven't already. It might be a completely new term or new concept. It generally is a better fit for the mid and larger sized healthcare institutions out there. So with that, let me just spend a few minutes here of my remaining time just talking about some considerations for different sized companies out there. And again, this is healthcare centric or even life sciences centric, but really I think these generally apply to companies and organizations in just about any industry. So small companies, the challenges and things that we want to think about the most are around what type of expertise and capability you actually have in-house with your own teams and staff. A lot of times we find that IT and certainly security are outsourced. There are often managed service providers and managed security service providers that pretty much control the security of just about everything in the network. So some important things to think about there is that things like ransomware tend to be your greatest risks. So when we look at scoping penetration tests and forms of assessment, we really want to focus on, what are the risks that face your organization? A lot of times your teams can work with just a basic computer and a browser, not a lot of servers and apps and things hosted on site. So, make sure that the pen testers are focused on what really matters to your organization, and definitely bring your managed service providers into the pen test scoping process so that they can share their knowledge and what they're aware of that could and should be tested. And definitely they're going to be the ones taking care of a lot of the findings and vulnerabilities. So make sure they're in that report out meeting as well. As you get into the mid-sized companies, I really feel like the mid-sized companies are in a sweet spot for good security, good hygiene, good control and management and everything over your assets and vulnerabilities. The challenges that we do see are that, you probably have some smaller teams. You'd love a little additional headcount, but sometimes that's a challenge. Budgets likewise could be limited a little bit. You don't always get everything you want, but the reality is with the controls and everything that's out there today is that you can take advantage of all the same technologies and everything else that the large enterprises are at an affordable price for the most part. And a lot of times those limited budgets, as long as they're spent wisely, are sufficient for good security and good testing and validation as well. And of course, that project backlog that can get just about anybody out there. But I always worry a little bit that if you don't have time to finish the projects on hand, if you do a penetration test and you now are aware of some findings and vulnerabilities, hopefully those can be prioritized and fixed in a timely manner. You don't want to be stuck leaving anything exposed for too long there. So a good strategy for a mid-sized company is to certainly do that annual penetration test. Make sure the scope is covering your external, your internal, and social engineering. Continuous external penetration testing is a great idea as well. External systems are exposed to the whole world 24/7. Keep a better eye on those, or a more regular watch on those. And then that internal pen testing could be done more like annually, or at least on some good regular basis. SynerComm always recommends doing those quarterly password assessments, doing specialized assessments on things like Wi-Fi, physical access and security, even looking at like Active Directory or your firewalls, custom developed applications. All of those things are good ideas, as well as that adversary simulations that we talked about. As soon as you have a security team capable of reacting to alerts and findings and things like that, adversary simulations become very, very useful. And last but not least, the larger healthcare companies. Some of the challenges we see there are a lot of times the technical debt. So problems that have been around for a long time, they're just not getting addressed. Often this could be caused by a lack of ownership among certain assets, or for responsibility to take care of findings and things like that, or just to get rid of legacy systems, applications, things along those lines. Long story short, large companies, whether it's healthcare or any industry, have a lot going on. You probably got stuff you wish you could have gotten rid of 10 or 15 years ago now, but it's still plugged in and running somehow. Those are things that we always have to take into consideration. I think the biggest difference, though, compared to like the mid-sized companies, though, from a pen test strategy, is because of that size, doing multiple different pen tests during the year, making sure that you're trying to get as much coverage inside your environment as possible. Internal pen tests don't touch everything, and you want to get some coverage on as much of that as possible. So not only doing multiple pen tests, but also getting different sets of eyes, between like your audit groups and your IT security, definitely have some of that risk management internally in there as well. I will skip over those shameless plugs because I know I am right at the end of my time here, but it should be obvious SynerComm is a IT security firm, and we do all of these pen tests and assessment services that we talked about. And I would definitely be happy to follow up with anyone that would have questions. I can be reached at brian.judd@synercomm.com. I can share that in chat as well. And then we have a couple trial offers here as well, or a trial and a special offer on our password cracking. So with that, Ron, I'll give it back to you.